Well, hello, everybody. I want to welcome you to East End Books, P-Town. As you can see, or as you can clearly see, we don't have the water backdrop tonight, unfortunately, because of the rain and the inclement weather. So we are in the bookstore, and but we're very happy to be able to scrunch people in and have this event. I know because of the weather, a lot of you switched to live stream. That's fine. The people that bought books on Eventbrite, you're going to have them, and the people that bought them on our website, those will be shipped out, so don't worry about that. And so I just wanted to, and I also don't have my Vanna White tonight to shoot me while I'm doing the announcements, which is fine. That's why I'm a bit too close to you. But anyway, I'm Jeff. I own East End Books here in Provincetown, and our newest store is in the Seaport in Boston on Pier 4. And we hope we'll see you at that store as well. All of our events for both stores are on our website, and it'll tell you whether it's Provincetown or Boston. Since it's the summer, you can bet that most of the events are here, although we have a few events coming up where the authors are doing double dipping, they call it. So this Saturday, we have Sam Garza flying in from Porto, Portugal, with the new Cesar Romero book, which is, you can't see it because you'll see it in a bit, Cesar Romero book. And then on the 27th of this month, he will be appearing at our store in Boston. Those of you that were here last week for Lori Gwen Shapiro and the wonderful new book about Amelia Earhart, which is going to be made into a movie, she will be at our store in Boston next month in conversation with Tom Perrotta. And then the other thing to mention to you, we try to look, and people ask where tickets are selling quick. The event that's selling very quickly is an event that's on our website, but it hasn't been advertised. So I'm mystified, not completely mystified, but it's November 2nd in our Boston store, we have an event with Harvard professor Stephanie Burt, who has the first authorized book on Taylor Swift coming out end of October called Taylor's Version. She also went viral. You may have heard of, she's got millions of TikTok followers, viral because she's teaching that class at Harvard on the kind of creative genius of Taylor Swift. So that's November 2nd. If you go on our website, you can get tickets to that if you're going to be in the area. And we will have a party next door at my friend's restaurant, my friend Kristen Canty's restaurant, Woods Hill table. Actually, it's going to be at her the block at Woods Hill, which is the new wine and tapas bar right next to my store and next to her restaurant. So there'll be details about that. I had the pleasure of meeting Marguerite at the NEBA Regional Book Conference, which was, I think at the time, I think it was one of their most packed events. And I think this was her first time going, which can be intimidating with so many people there and so many people to talk to and sign books to. But it was quite a nice event. And when I saw this book, I just immediately said, we have to do something. Not only because it's such an very important book and really does give you a lot of hope in a time that we really need hope, but also like a lot of people, I'm sure in this audience and people watching, I've worn many hats and wear many hats in addition to this one. So in addition to being publisher, filmmaker, and owning bookstores, I used to do complex environmental litigation in Florida for back when we had Democrats in statewide office. I was a senior assistant attorney general to Bob Butterworth, and who had set up an environmental SWAT team to protect the environment and to protect the mangroves, the Everglades, the aquifer in Central Florida, the manatees in the Wakava River, and that kind of thing. Back in a time where judges would say to you, the environment, and, we don't have to protect, so it was quite a time. So this book is just fantastic. And I really would recommend it to anyone that's, not just the science about it and learning about trees, but it really is a book, I think, that opens your heart. And that's not too many books do that, so they're giving you information, I think, really wrapping you up. What did my friend, she said, like a warm blanket. So I think that was a big compliment. A friend of mine who's a book buyer in London, by the way. So this is the book, Take to the Trees. a story of hope, science, and self-discovery in America's imperiled forests. And like I said, we'll have signed copies available. I just wanted to let you know that Marguerite is a professor at Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism and has written for the New York Times and the New Yorker, and you can, on both of them, but New Yorker, it's very easy online to do a search, and you can see her pieces in the New Yorker. And if you got a print subscription like I do, you can see them there as well. She's been in many publications. She's also the author of The Measure of Manhattan, and she lives in New York. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this around and give you to Marguerite.
Thank you very much, and I am delighted to be here. We did meet at NEBA, and I had forgotten that, but I'm really happy also because this is a very lovely, important, special, and intimate audience. I don't know you two, but everybody else.
Will, they're amazing.
I can't wait to, but it's really lovely to feel so at home and to feel so connected with people right away at a reading. And I'm also very happy to be talking here because Cape Cod figures in the book. It's where I spent most of my formative summers as a kid, and it's where I ran wild and I think developed a lot of the connection that I feel to the natural world. So I'm very happy to be here. I thought what I would do is start by telling you a little bit about the origin and the genesis for the book, which gives you a sense of its structure and some of the aims of the book, and then I would read aloud and then open it up for questions. So, yeah, I can also scooch forward. As was mentioned, I'm a professor of science and environmental journalism, and at a university that's been in the news a lot, and we'll not talk about that right now. But many of my students know, and many of my colleagues know, that I'm very taken with this phrase, the undiscovered country of the nearby. It was written by an author, John Hanson Mitchell, who has done a lot on history and gardens and landscapes and people's interactions with these spaces and sort of looks at them through time. He did a book called Ceremonial Time, which is, I think, 1,000 years on 1 acre and telling the story through time. And this phrase, the undiscovered country of the nearby, has just always moved me because it seems an exhortation to look closely at what is right in front of us and that we often don't see. So at some point, usually during the semester, I will use that phrase to encourage my students to look closely and find stories and see things right near them. This book and plants and trees are very much in the undiscovered country of the nearby. We walk by them. We don't often really look at them and really see them and give them much attention. So this book for me emerged in the undiscovered country of the nearby. And it has 3 main strands. The first strand came from my mother. She had dementia, and I was her caretaker for many, many years. And as you know, is often the case when you're caring for someone who has dementia or who has some other illness, and you're really caretaking, you have to become intimate with sort of everything in their space. And if you're taking over their medications and their apartment, their homes, and sort of caring for them, you really are intimate with their books, with their papers. And I had moved my mother. I had tried to simplify her apartment for her. But after she died, and she lived in a very small apartment, after she died, I discovered that she had kept a tree journal, and I had never seen it in the 16 years of caring for her and in moving her from one apartment to another. And I learned that for 11 years she had kept sort of a record of all the trees that she had met. She talked about what it was like to meet them. She wrote about their natural history. She drew pictures of them. She pasted in leaves. And it was this incredible, beautiful discovery. And also so it was in just a very simple 3-ring binder. And in the inside flap, there was an envelope. And on the envelope, she had written, "I have not been able to find the tree yet." So she sort of left this gift, and she left a mystery. And I looked inside the envelope, and I didn't know what it was that was in there. I couldn't identify it. So that was the first strand that came from the undiscovered country of the nearby. The second strand came when I was walking with an arborist in western Massachusetts, and we were going into this forest that I know very well, and I was so excited. I could not wait. I was finally going to get to see this incredible, luxurious green space through this arborist's eyes, and I was going to get to know it. And it turned out to be a completely different kind of walk, because it was a forest he knew for many decades longer. And yes, it was green, but he could see that a lot of the green was invasive plants. He could see that the trees that were there were really suffering. They were in decline from drought followed by rain. He showed me all sorts of diseases, all sorts of insect pests, just a forest that was really, as he sort of explained, a shadow of its former self. And so that was, and a lot of it was due to climate change. Sort of compounding things, making trees stressed and vulnerable. And so that was the second strand. I couldn't see what was right in front of me through the eyes of people who really could see it and appreciate it. And then the final strand came when I wrote a piece for the New York Times based on what the arborist had told me, and it was about climate change's impacts on the forests of New England. And as I was working on that story, I met two remarkable arborists, Bear Levangie and Melissa Levangie Ingersoll, who had started something called the Women's Tree Climbing Workshop. And they were taking me around Petersham Common out in the middle more of Massachusetts, and they were showing me what they would see in all the trees, similar to what the arborist in Western Mass had been showing me, but these were trees not in a forest that was going about things on its own. These were in highly managed spaces with a lot of contact with people, and again, something I could not really see clearly until I spoke with them. And because they'd started this women's tree climbing workshop, I was very fortunate that they invited me to attend. So I decided to find my mother's tree for her. I decided to really dive into what climate change is doing to trees and forests. And I decided to learn how to climb trees. And then I decided to write about all of it. And that's this. So those three strands sort of braided together to become science journalism, memoir, and a first-person narrative. So that gives you a sense of the structure it moves between those different strands across the book. So what I thought I would do next is read a few passages. It starts sort of positive, it gets dark, and then it gets a little bit less dark, and then a little more positive, and then it's got an arc, but it bottoms in the middle. Anyway, so the first bit is from the prologue, and it's where I first meet the hemlocks. That there are 3 eastern hemlocks that I get to know really well over the course of several years, and who become very important characters across the book. And it introduces the Women's Tree Climbing Workshop too. So I'll read that first. 3 hemlocks stand close in the small grove. They have grown up together about 20 feet apart, their branches touching in places, their life histories intertwined. They have been through the same storms, felt the same winds, the same heat, and the same winters. They have shared creatures, squirrels, chipmunks, warblers, flycatchers, thrushes, spiders, and dozens of other animals have moved between them. Deer, skunk, turkey, porcupine, bobcat, fisher, hare, bear, and perhaps a moose or few have moved beneath them. Hemlocks are among the longest-lived trees on the East Coast, and in the right conditions, in cool, damp, absent certain pests, these conifers can live at least 500 years and reach over 100 feet. These three are about 70 years old and 80 feet tall. Even young hemlocks have gravitas. They are stunning dark trees, their bark deeply creviced and thick. Some hemlocks have bottom branches that droop toward the ground at the tips, creating around the trunk a circular open-air room with a low roof. These three have no lower branches that are easy to grab hold of. Their green needled limbs start 15 feet up. 15 feet can be 15 feet too high when you are learning to climb trees, as I set out to do one May weekend at Camp High Rock in Mount Washington, Massachusetts. 24 women and I had come to participate in the Women's Tree Climbing Workshop, an organization founded by identical twin sisters Bear Levangie and Melissa Levangie Ingersoll. The workshop has trained over 2,000 women, mostly those who care for trees professionally, but also lichenologists, ornithologists, primatologists, other ologists, circus performers, dancers, artists, photographers, writers, and the generally arboreally curious. I was there to be in trees and to better understand them. Trees and forests are facing existential threats because of climate change, but it can be a struggle to grasp the extent of the danger or to make sense of the complex and deadly interactions playing out between heat, drought, fire, water, disease, and pests. I hope that being in trees would allow me to better see them through the eyes of people like the Levangies, who care for trees and who perceive so much more about trees and forests than many of us do. I also wanted to overcome, if possible, a terror of heights that had developed after I became a mother. If either of my kids or anyone I was with moved toward the edge of something, my shins felt squeamish and fuzzy, coursed by waves of electric buzzing. The fear traveled from my legs and sometimes from the back of my hands to my core, becoming a gut-lurching sense of being on a precipice that I'm going to fall off and yet can't step back from. Dizzying and destabilizing, it is a feeling not unlike the one I have when thinking about climate change. That spring weekend at High Rock turned out to be the start of an ascent in ways I did not anticipate. As I came to understand more fully what climate change is doing to trees and forests, I began to climb regularly, returning to the workshop several times as a participant and traveling around the country to observe others. I met women of all ages, from those in their 20s to those in their 70s, and of all backgrounds. Over and over, I heard stories of sexism, many set in the predominantly male arboriculture industry, but the stories could be set most anywhere. They are experiences familiar to many women, to many people, stories of disregard, indifference, othering, dehumanization, hierarchy, and subjugation. They are the origin stories of the climate crisis, centuries of exploitation of people and the non-human natural world. Climbing in the way that the Levangies and team teach it, engendering a culture of consideration, attention, and care, can change people in surprising ways. You think you are learning one set of things, but discover you are learning a whole different set. As I learned to climb, I did things I never thought I could do. I overcame physical weakness and phobias. I came to rely on other people and trust myself in new ways. I came to terms with tragedy and loss in my family. I found a new way to confront climate anxiety, and I came to know trees more deeply. I began to look closely, to see, and to understand our profound connection to them. Everything that flows from trees and forests, clean air, biodiversity, cooler temperatures, clean water, human health, carbon kept solid and out of atmospheric currency, rain, regional weather patterns, culture, history is unraveling. If trees are to continue to sustain us and to help us address our apocalyptic mess, we need to pay them more attention, give them more care. We need to take to the trees. The next section is from the chapter called Groundy, and it lays out sort of some of, in a little bit more detail, what I was just talking about with the sort of myriad threats that are affecting trees. And there is a huge chunk of statistics in the middle here that I'm taking out on the advice of Tom. The chapter is called Groundy because a groundy at the Women's Tree Climbing Workshop is a person who helps you when you're climbing. So my groundy would basically say every few feet, or in my case inches, tie a slip knot. Because if you tie a slip knot and you fall or you mess up, which I did, the slip knot would catch you. In the sort of more general practice of arboriculture, a groundy is someone who passes up the chainsaw, who will retrieve the chainsaw, who will help take down limbs, who does everything to ensure the safety of the climbers. So it's a technical term, but also sort of a buddy term from the workshop. Most of us are groundies. We see a tree's flare, the widening bark-covered buttress-like structures that are the uppermost part of the roots. We see the lower trunk or bole and touch the patterns of bark. We see leaves and branches from below or from afar, but there is so much we often don't see. The life of the canopy, for instance, or the life of the roots. We don't see the entire world living in trees. The insects, the lichens, the amphibians, reptiles, birds, small mammals, the other plants. Trees can be entire ecosystems unto themselves. We don't see the beneficial pharmacopoeia trees provide. Mostly we don't even see the forest or the trees, a well-known phenomenon called plant blindness. Despite the fact that people are utterly dependent on plants and trees, we wouldn't be here if they weren't. Plants and trees are taken for granted. A great dying is underway in forests the world over. Most of the global loss is driven by deforestation for agriculture, logging, and development. But pests, diseases, and climate change are increasingly having profound and cumulative effects. The scale of death and disease is unimaginable in extent and speed. Some trees are heat-stressed, drought-stressed, burnt by fires too hot and too frequent for them to survive or come back after. Lack of regeneration has been observed in forests everywhere, even in those not repeatedly incinerated. This is concerning for many reasons, including the fact that it can take trees decades before they can reproduce, and because invasive plants often flourish in their stead. Trees are declining and dying as seasons change, and as the vicissitudes of weather prove too erratic and rapid for many of these highly adaptive organisms to adapt to. Trees are being downed by winds stronger than they were raised in, and at times coming from directions they didn't build themselves to withstand. Roots are rotting in too much rain that comes too fast. This abundance of water is often followed by drought and deadly heat. Trees are being stripped of protective bark because there is less snow to deter herbivores. Trees flowering in the ever earlier spring lose their flower and leaves in snap frosts. Because trees are stressed and struggling, many are weakened. Climate change is impairing their ability to fend off or survive infestations of insects or pathogens that they were more readily able to combat in the past. Forests are increasingly unrecognizable to those who know them well. I've gone back to places in the Adirondacks, in western and southeastern Pennsylvania, that I was in 20 or 30 years ago, and these forests are different, says Neil Peterson, a forest ecologist at Harvard University. In my lifetime now, I'm going to see beech gone, hemlock gone, ash gone, like we all heard the stories of chestnut. The magnitude and pace of what is happening can be hard to take in, even by those studying it, even for those who do not suffer from plant blindness. I'm used to the bad news, says Valerie Trouet, a dendrochronologist at the University of Arizona. In the early 2020s, she gave a talk in Yosemite, a place she hadn't visited for a while. I was really in shock. I was crying to see how little there is left in just the past 15 years of those majestic trees, and this in one national park. You hear about it, you know it, but then to see it is a different thing. So that's the dark section. Not that it gets any less dark, but I'm going to now read a section from the aspen chapter. Because all of these impacts that I've described they're all different, but they're all hitting simultaneously, and they're all interacting and are sometimes synergistic. Writing about how climate change is affecting trees and interacting with all these other forces can be very much of a tangle. So each tree in this book, there's aspen, whitebark pine, oak, Atlantic white cedar. Each tree sort of steps forward and takes center stage for a while and describes one facet of these different forces. And aspen is the first tree I talk about. It's the tree I love, as I'll read to you in a moment. It's also one of the first trees that really helped foresters and landscape ecologists and silviculturalists in the West see that what was happening at a landscape scale. And really, it told the story of drought in a way that that took scientists a bit by surprise, and that sadly has held up. And they began looking into this at the turn of this century. Suzanne Marchetti and I are hiking along Beaver Ponds Trail in the West Elk Mountains, about a half an hour from Gunnison, Colorado. It is early fall, and the leaves of the quaking aspen have turned brilliant yellow. The forest on either side of the path is abundantly aspen, their pale trunks luminous against the tangle of yellow-green ferns below them, and the dark green to black subalpine fir that appear like shadows among them. Over the next decades, the slow-growing conifers will likely come to dominate this forest, and the aspen will diminish until there is an upheaval, pest, fire, wind, that takes out fir, and then aspen will rise again. The aspen are first up, Marchetti tells me, but they don't stay long. Marchetti, an ecologist who works for the Forest Service out of the Gunnison office, stops to point out a fungus called artist conch at the base of one tree. It has a smooth, flat side that is pearl-colored, the size of two hands and shaped like a painter's palette. Gandoderma applanatum is a common decay fungus. Marchetti points out aspen that look chimeric. Above 3 feet, they have the tree's smooth, light bark with what look like coal-lined eyes, black strokes around knobs left by former branches. Closer to the ground, the papery outer layer has been stripped by gophers, leaving rough, dark underbark. Marchetti points out aspen with galls, aspen with cankers, aspen speckled with a black mold that is feeding on aphid frass. On one tree, she uses a fingernail to scrape away a tiny patch of bark to reveal the fresh green of chlorophyll beneath. This is a healthy forest, birth, growth, and decay. Quaking aspen are one of my favorite trees. I can sit for hours enthralled by their particular dance, Populus tremuloides, the tremulous, trembling aspen. In aspen and all poplars, the petiole or stem that connects leaves to branches is long and flat instead of round as in most other deciduous trees. Not only is it flat, but it connects to the leaf on a perpendicular. Leaf latitude meets petiole longitude, and adventure follows. When wind catches the petioles and leaves, it seems as if it is arriving from all directions at once. Green or gold, an aspen canopy flashes and shimmers in even a sigh of breeze. Watching aspen makes me feel that I am breathing underwater, that I am living in a sea of wind. Watching aspen is like watching truths made visible. Everything is somehow connected. Tiny movements have huge impacts. Thousands of trees can each dance their own riff and be thousands of leaves can each dance their own riff and be part of one tree. Marchetti and I followed the trail until it opens onto a large pond with a grass-top beaver lodge near the center. Green conifers, gray mountains, wisps of blue in a moonstone sky, and the astonishing, flickering, blazing yellow of the aspen. A short drive away, along roads dense with foliage tourists, there is little flickering, blazing yellow except in patches. The landscape looks dull, its color partly washed out. It is a shocking landscape. Miles of dead trees in Kebler Pass, the largest aspen stand in the state. So they identified what was happening to the aspen as something called sudden aspen decline, and they identified it in about 2008. Sudden aspen decline, for many observers, marked an inflection point. I think that both the scientists studying forests and the broader public in the West hadn't realized that our forests were so close to the edge and so vulnerable, says William Anderegg, a biologist at the University of Utah. Unfortunately, it really was the canary in the coal mine, and we started to see more and more tree species dying in the West. So the next bit is from the oak chapter. I'm skipping all of the other tree species and all of their various elements and facets, and there is a slightly positive note here. So, as I said in the prologue, part of the reporting was learning to climb, but part of it was also getting to travel around the country with the Women's Tree Climbing Workshop. And they had just started when I was reporting a workshop in North Carolina. And so I drove down with Bear Levangie. She and her sister and the other instructors taught the workshop. I observed, and then we drove back home. Bear and I drove back home. So that's the moment that we're at. Bear and I start the drive north. At our first coffee stop, which is at a fast food, sprawling, mallish area, Bear gets out her shears and kneels in front of a maple sapling in the parking lot. It had been tethered to 3 stakes for stability, but no one came back to check on it, and the tree looks tortured. Thick canvas-like straps cut into its trunk. 2 branches have been nearly severed from the trunk by the straps. Bear cuts away as much as she can and tries to pull out the rest of the strap, but some is too deep. She cuts the bonds of another maple, too. The maples are no longer being completely dismembered and choked by the cords, but they will likely die soon. They are the wrong species for a hot parking lot, and their leaves look too pale. They are very unhappy here, Bear says. She had liberated a cherry tree at the U-Haul place at the beginning of the trip. Like her sister Melissa, she often sneaks out at night to undo damage, to liberate trees from suffocating volcano-like mounds of mulch, trees that she has seen suffering and dying when she passed them during the day. We talk about the southern magnolia haunting us. Over dinner, one of the workshop participants had shared pictures of a magnolia about 70 feet tall, perhaps 100 years old. The photos showed a vast, complicated, beautiful tree, a tree of enchantment, an epic tree. Its branches so intricate and wild and mythic, it seemed a tree that brought the world to life. Magnolias were among the earliest flowering trees to appear. They arose roughly 120 million years ago, before bees, moths, and butterflies had evolved, and so they rely on pollination by beetle, drawing them in with humongous fragrant flowers, which in some species emit heat that volatilizes the nectar, ensuring the scent drifts as widely as possible. Southern magnolia, my mother wrote, beneath a colored pencil drawing of a creamy water lily-like flower in a 9-inch leaf that has come loose of its tape, is so heavily leafed that it forms a tower of trees, and the trunk is hardly seen. The photos we were shown turned out to be before shots. The tree was felled by an arborist crew soon after. It had been in something's way. I had to leave the table. I felt sick, Bear says. You've just killed a sentient being. You have no right. Arborists must do what their clients demand or not work. They may try to explain why a driveway should be moved so an ancient tree can survive, or why an addition or a pool could go somewhere else so as not to destroy a healthy grove, or why pruning should only be done at certain times. Melissa tells customers, for instance, that even if they want her to, she is not going to prune their elms when the trees are in full leaf and most vulnerable to the beetle that carries the deadly fungus. I'd love to prune your elm tree, but I'm going to wait for a few months because this is the time when your tree could be more susceptible than ever, she says. Likewise, she won't treat with pesticides in the early spring as trees are blooming and bees, hornets, flies, and other insects are pollinating. It's the whole web, Melissa says. Like many arborists, she talks to people about trees when she is in the post office, the grocery store, anywhere, to anyone who will listen. Sometimes those conversations lead nowhere. People mostly still don't foreground trees. But sometimes the trees are seen as integral to the whole. In 2017, 4 artists bought singer, composer, and civil rights activist Nina Simone's childhood home in Tryon, North Carolina, to save it from demolition. They have been working to restore the small house and create a museum there. The trees are as important to the restoration and the honoring of Simone as the house, including the magnolia that extends over one corner of the roof. It is such a beautiful tree. It was incredible to see it, says artist Julie Meirutu. There is something about it being there and living over time and having been witness to a certain type of time and being the guardian of the house. Protecting the enormous magnolia meant releasing it. It was covered with vines that were starting to choke it out, says an arborist who spent a spring day with a colleague removing kudzu, wisteria, and grapevines, gobs of vines, like a giant nest, she describes, vines that filled an entire dump truck. The branches are now no longer constrained. Like many trees, magnolia can move at night. Recordings of birch, cypress, cedar, oak, maple, and other tree species made with laser scanners reveal that branches move, sometimes by many inches, sometimes assuming new configurations by morning. Species vary greatly in their nocturnal bending and stretching. Southern magnolia has the most unusual and evocative pattern. Over the course of one night, the tree's branches trace the same movement 3 times, like a Buddhist prostration, like a dancer practicing her choreography, like a refrain. And then the last little bit is about what, it's about how climbing is one way, learning how to climb trees is one way of sort of getting a different perspective and a different view, a different way of looking at things. And one of the workshop participants says something so beautiful about it. So this is just a short quote from her. Climbing offers a different way to look at the world, says Raiko Matsuda Goodwin, a biological anthropologist at Fordham University and a workshop participant. It opens up a different perspective to look, but not only looking outside, looking inside too, to think about what's good for you and what's good for the world. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Also, if you want me to read more, there are a bunch more pages.
I have a question. First of all, it was so beautiful and just lyrical. I just can't wait to read it. But I'm curious about hemlocks because we have one in our little yard in Hastings-on-Hudson, and it's huge and doing well. And I know the hemlock woolly adelgid, I think, is a pest that's been attacking a lot of hemlocks. And how are they doing? I'm just wondering if you know generally if they're thriving or are they succumbing?
They're not doing so great.
No.
There's the hemlock woolly adelgid, and there's also a scale insect, a non-native scale insect that's sort of hitting them simultaneously. They're, for individual trees, a hemlock near a house, there are ways of treating to prevent scale, and sometimes, and the woolly adelgid, and sometimes if you treat and if the tree is in good shape and well watered and everything, they can do very well for a very long time. Doing that at a landscape scale is not feasible, but there is, in Pennsylvania, there is a section of forest in eastern Pennsylvania where they actually are doing that at the sort of more landscape scale, or they were, because the hemlocks are so critical to the ecosystems, and they really wanted to preserve that, but it's hugely costly. It's controversial because it has a lot of downsides, and it requires, doing it all the time. There's been some really interesting work on trees, hemlock trees that do survive the infestation, and what are called lingering trees. and there are researchers who were looking into, and I don't know how their funding is at the moment, but who were looking into studying lingering hemlock, because they have seen in a bunch of studies that when they would propagate those and put them back out in the forest, many of them did extremely well. The ones that had survived, that people had identified after there had been a lot of death from scale and woolly Belgian.
Oh, right. And they're doing that with beech. I know the Times just had that big story about beech trees and trying to find the ones that survive.
The nematode, yeah.
Interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome. Suzanne?
I would like to know if you got over your fear of climbing trees and what your experience was in terms of becoming intimate with a tree in climbing trees.
Yeah, so I think it's okay to say, I don't think it's like giving it away, but yes. I did overcome my fear through a very intimate relationship with the hemlocks and through the particular way that the women at the Women's Tree Climbing Workshop teach, sort of really creating a strong sense of community and a strong sense of sort of individual empowerment and being able to face your fears. And I did. It took me a long time. I was in, I was in workshops with people who were like, they were standing there 1 minute and the next minute they'd never climbed before, and then they were up there, including my first groundie who was so good at it. And I'd be like, tie a slip. Oh yeah, you already have. With me, she was like, tie a slip knot. I will. Tie a slip knot, tie a will. So, but I did, and it really came from, it's a lot of different things that came together and contributed to my overcoming it, but being in the hemlocks and really being in the hemlocks was a very big part of it, and spending time in them.
So knots, there seems to be an interest in knots generally online too. It has to be related in some way to slip knots and fast-made ladders and
There are so
all
many.
this.
Yes.
There's a weird connection.
There's so many knots, and I think it's a metaphor. And I had to, their homework for the first workshop was to learn 12 knots,
Wow.
and I was already behind when I got to the first workshop. But I did learn to tie some knots, but and the way that arborists talk about knots is, and there's a section about it, and rope, it's like poetry. It's incredible. So yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Wasn't what I intended to ask you about, but we're down the road there in Truro, and we knew the wife of Anna Hamburger, the wife of Philip Hamburger, the journalist. She lived there all her life. We used to help her out of the ocean. She could get it once she was in. We get her out, and she got her talking. We're in the woods there. We talk about how the shift between the oaks and the red oaks are dying from some kind of blight, and the white oak, and the battle between that. And then she said, when I was a girl, this was all farmland.
Yeah.
From Boundbrook Island to what's now 6, and all that. So that touched me, what you mentioned about how it's continually evolving, and we see it now because we're 40-some years, so we see the whole thing change in a way where the pines are now taking over. Then they're maxing out, and we're not sure what's coming next.
Yeah, and there is a pine. There's a beetle that, because of climate change, has been able to move very rapidly up the East Coast.
They're getting huge trees.
So that is another thing that the pines are going to be contending
Does it
with.
weaken them? Because then you put on top
It
of
can
that
kill them.
storms, and sort of like, we're astonished how just close to the ocean. It's just huge trees are just bent over like it's half-cooked spaghetti.
Yeah, I think it's all.
Is that a blight that causes that? Or?
I mean, there's also a lot of because of sea level rise. I don't know specifically at that site, but that there are a lot of ghost forests along many coasts too because of the saltwater intrusion. So, but it could. I think what's happening is that it's many things all hitting simultaneously, and the trees don't have time to sort of build their resilience. They're very adaptable, but they just don't have the time.
I have to say, one more thing.
Yeah.
That's it. I never talk, so I liked your title very much because we have a kid staying with us now, and I said, no, why don't we go outside and watch the trees grow?
That's excellent.
Anyway.
He sounds very promising. Ken?
You know, when we lived in Upper Manhattan, as you live now, I spent 8 Wednesdays going to the Parks Department and taking a class in becoming a citizen pruner of street trees. And I was amazed by how much they kept focusing on telling you to stop and just look at the tree.
Yeah.
And it will tell you what it needs. But I was, and you know, for people who don't know Manhattan, don't realize that it is a forest. It was a forest at one time. There's still so many trees there. I was wondering, is there a particular tree in your neighborhood that you know or keep going back to or use to mark time as you've lived there?
It's interesting. Part of my first connection to trees was my mom taking me and my brother into Riverside Park and having us memorize the names of all the trees. And so I feel like, I don't know if there's one particular one, but I do feel this great connection and familiarity. And I feel it very acutely when there's more light. I'm noticing that some of the really big trees have been falling, and that the London plains, which always generally have been so hardy, are not looking as good. But there's not one in particular. There was one on a hill, like between 115 and 114, that had this like long, low hanging branch that I used to when you were a kid, and you were allowed to climb on trees. I spent a lot of time on, but that has been gone for a long time. I did just take the citizen pruner class.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I haven't taken the test yet. we hope that I'm better at that than climbing. But then I hope to be able to sort of visit all the trees on our block and start caring for them in a more consistent way. But I really have to stop talking about taking the test and actually take the test.
It's not that bad.
It shouldn't be, but yeah. Did you have one tree that you were really attached to in the neighborhood?
I think it was just the one right outside our window, because my desk was closest to the window, and I would just always stop and turn around and look at it, and I could see the upper reaches, and then every time we walked out the front door of our apartment building, there was the trunk.
Yeah.
And so I got to see top to bottom, and I would see the birds coming through, and
That's lovely.
when the migrations was happening, see that in real time.
Yeah.
First time we saw squirrel babies ever, because we were on the 5th floor, we could actually see into the nest.
Wow.
And what they used for the nest. Of course, all the plastic bags, we always worried about them, but yeah, you could see their whole evolution.
That's really cool. I've never seen a squirrel baby.
They don't come out adults.
I don't think I've ever seen a pigeon baby either. Definitely a rat baby.
When you were writing this book, did you have anyone or any audience in mind that you were speaking to? I mean, this could, obviously can be, hopefully lots of different people with lots of different views are going to read this and be inspired by it.
My hope was, because everybody loves trees so much. I mean, it's very rare that you meet a person who hates trees. My thought was that, and you often read about drought or fire or sea level rise in the ghost forest or or the spotted lanternfly. You read about these things sort of more discreetly. And my hope was that it would reach a much broader audience because it was about trees and was trying to provide a survey to show that it's not this thing or that thing, it's all these things, generally all at the same time. And also, I mean, Ken knows this, but I've, the kind of writing that I've always done has been sort of very traditional, sort of science journalism, and I've practiced that for a long time. This is very personal, and it's first person, which I was always telling students never to do. And, so I was hoping too that would move it into a different audience, and I don't know, but that was the hope.
Oh, cool, Amelia. Did you have any, one experience climbing a tree that was, particularly moving to you, or in the workshop or otherwise?
I had a whole bunch of them, and some had to do with sort of the difficulty of learning how to climb and my own sort of inability to get it quickly, and then having something happen in the tree that moved me to another level. And I can actually, as you asked me that question, I can feel where I was in the tree at some of those. It was one of the hemlocks mostly, and I had a very similar experience once I learned how to climb, in one of the most enormous London plane trees that I've ever seen, that was on the Smith University campus, where the wind came in while I was in the tree, and I realized that I would have been really scared in the past, and I was just filled with joy. And so there's also, there are bunches of them, and it's hard to pull one out, but they're sort of my markers in terms of getting up the tree, those moments that were sort of pivotal. And
And you write about them in the book.
I do.
Yeah.
The book moves. I do 3 workshops, and the book moves up through the canopy, and then comes back down. So it physically moves up, and then through these different tree species, but the hemlocks stay the whole time.
I was going to ask, with all the wildfires happening out west and in Canada, and to a much lesser extent on the East Coast, fortunately, but there's obviously a lot of concern about property loss and just the loss of carbon sinks in the trees themselves. But at the same time, these fires are releasing just enormous amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which is worsening, greenhouse gases and climate change. And
Yes.
I'm just wondering if you think that the amount of carbon, I haven't really studied it too closely, but is it just making a big difference in the amount of carbon dioxide getting released in the last 5 years since these?
There are a bunch of articles, a bunch of papers that came out in journals in the last, I would say, 6 to 8 months that are looking at that, and that are really concerned that there is going to be sort of one of those tipping points.
Right.
And yes, it is massive release, and there've also been a lot of articles about how these plans to sequester are not going to work if the forests aren't there or going through drought, and so yes, I think that is a really, really big and growing concern.
Yeah.
I don't know if it I don't know numbers, but I have seen a lot of papers on that
Okay,
recently.
I should check those out.
I can send them to you. I've got
Oh,
a
thanks.
new file on them.
Okay. I also interviewed a fire scientist at Colorado State University who, for something I was writing, and he explained that some of these fires are burning so hot, hotter and more
Yes.
intensely than we've ever seen, that what's coming after them is not a new forest, but like it's just remaining a grassland. And so the fear is that we may not get that second generation of forest growth because the fires themselves are just at a whole nother level of heat and destruction.
That's exactly right. So because they weren't, we had fire suppression for about a century, and there weren't the regular burns that the landscape and the trees were sort of familiar with or adapted to. They're burning so hot that they're just like making it impossible. The seed stock is gone, and that's, I skipped that section in the prologue, but Yellowstone is just seeing a complete, I sometimes exaggerate, but a lot of lack of regeneration because things started to come back after the fires in '88, but then there were more fires and things are just being burned again and again and again.
Right. That's interesting because in the past those seeds would have survived, I guess. And-
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That's a really, really good point and a big concern.
Right.
Great.
There was a question about how long it took you to finish the book from the time you first conceived of it, and whether or not it went through any significant changes. Like sometimes happens when you start. Did you change direction, or was it pretty much linear going all the way through?
I mean, it roughly had the same structure that the proposal had. It took me about a year to write the proposal because I have a really phenomenal, brilliant agent who would just keep telling me to do more, and then I think it took a year to really, really work out the structure for the most part. And then I think it happened pretty fast for me. The first book I did many years ago took many years, and this was several years, like 4 years, I think, all total. The idea for the structure stayed the same, but there was a lot of micro work within as I was writing it because of my editors, my board of editors led by my husband and my children, some outside readers, and then my incredible editor at Norton. And a lot of it was trying to, I would get lost in nerd out on all of the science, and I would not have a good sense of rhythms and sort of the musicality of moving between first person and memoir and the science, and that took a long time. And I've mentioned this in a couple conversations about the book, but there's an artist Tom and I love named Isabella Ortiz, and like many artists, she does very organic, colorful work, and she'll work from one side and then she'll turn and she'll work from the other side and she'll turn. And I felt like, unlike most of the things I've written in the past where I felt more of a linear sort of progression, I was constantly turning and coming in from that side and from the top and from that paragraph, and that allowed a lot more free association and sort of I think some of the lyricism, because I would keep coming back at things and be surprised, if that makes any sense.
Very nice. Well, you've got a great publisher, so that was good as well.
Amazing
And
editor, yes.
that's wonderful.
And publisher, yes.
Editors are so important and underappreciated, I think. Often.
Yes, Tom.
That's oh, is that
I felt appreciated.
unappreciated?
I was really fascinated by the part about trees moving, and I was wondering if scientists who looked at this have any idea why they do that.
Increasingly they do, and there is a scientist in the book who talks about this over the course of his career, he's based in Tasmania, and he studies crop plants as well as trees, and he has developed all of these sensors that allow him to look. Other scientists have done this too, but to look at to measure the minute movements of trees over the course of a day, over the course of hours, not just the trunks but the leaves. And he described how over the course of his career he is really, it's like his way of seeing trees has really changed, and he sees them as almost sort of akin to animals with these movements and this respiration, and most of it has to do with water movement, so that leaves will swell up and they'll desiccate, and the branches are moving water around, and a lot of the really vital water movement happens at night, which makes sense because less is lost to the sun and to the heat of the day. Interestingly, or not so interestingly, or unhappily, as the nights warm up, that is really affecting trees in a way that I think has been kind of shocking as well. And he looks at that. So there is, most of the trees in here are around North America. There's one tree that in here that he tells the story of in part, which is a Wallamai pine, which was found in Australia. Yeah, great question.
Well, sort of following that, you mentioned at one point when there's huge imbalance between the dry air around the top of a tree and water supply from the bottom, it create cavitation.
Yes.
And that you can actually hear that?
You can hear
popping.
it. Yeah, you can hear them popping. It's like it just breaks. Yes, you can hear it. I haven't heard it. I've heard recordings. I've never heard it real in real life. But yeah, you can hear it popping. It's like William Andrew describes it as popcorn, string snapping. Like, yeah.
What causes that exactly?
The pressure on, like, the pull from the atmosphere becomes too great, and because it's very dry and there's not enough water, or it can't move fast enough, and it ruptures the system.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Hey, I know that you spoke a little bit in the beginning about how this was all precipitated by finding your mother's tree journal. I just wondered if throughout the course of writing this book, if you felt like you had a different understanding of her, or came to know her differently.
That's a beautiful question, and yes, I did. I because she had dementia for so long, it was 16 years, and I had watched her decline for so long. I had really, most of my memories were of her in decline and ill, and I did still feel she's very much of a naturalist, and I did feel very connected to that because that was very important to her to communicate to my brother and to me, and she really trained us that way. But that had very much receded, and over the course of this, I could hear her voice and her writing. I didn't know what an incredibly beautiful writer she was. Her passages about trees are incredibly beautiful, and I kept putting them in because writers are terrified of plagiarism. I kept copying and pasting some of them and then putting them in to Google and Google Books, thinking, did she take this from a field guide? And she may have. There may be some from the Berkeley Library where she did a lot of identification. There might be pieces or some of the information, but that was also really lovely to discover. And all of these memories started coming back. And I felt that also there's a bit in her about her relationship with her father. And I think the role of this tree journal and her naturalist sensibilities is very connected to her, I think, is connected to her father in a way that I had not appreciated at all before. Yeah, it's a lovely question. Thank you.
Well, if there's no more questions, we can have some book signing and some photographs and some conversation. I want to thank you very much for coming to Provincetown, to East End Books. And where can people find out about future appearances by you? Is it on your website?
Yes,
or-
I now have a website.
Not that I'm prompting you.
Yes, just myname.com,
Okay, perfect.
and everything is listed there.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.